Hi, I'm Alanis Morissette, and welcome to my podcast. I'm going to be having conversations with different individuals from different schools and walks of life, discussing everything from psychology to art to spirituality to design to health and well-being to relationships, whether they be romantic or colleagueship or parent with children relationships. And we'll be diving into science, neurobiology, music, travel, social commentary, maybe a tiny bit of political, and feminism, which I like to call the feminine movement in both males and females alike. And hopefully have a lot of fun while doing that, with these conversations being very sacred to me, although definitely imperfect and not precious. Throughout the many conversations, if I reference a person or a book, you can find more information about them at my website, alanis.com. Welcome to the show. So my first guest is a woman named Katherine Woodward Thomas. I have the pleasure of calling this woman my friend. She started out as someone I was going to speak with in a therapeutic context to find a way to meet my eventual husband, and I credit Katherine with helping me in my own personal relationships. And then eventually I was just so sad at the thought of keeping a professional boundary with her that we stopped that quality of work that we did together in that formal context, and we segued into a very lively friendship. Katherine is the author of the national bestseller Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. And she's a licensed marriage and family therapist and the co-creator of Calling in the One and Feminine Power online courses. She's the creator of Conscious Uncoupling and the Conscious Uncoupling 5-week online course that was launched in 2011. Katherine's new book, Conscious Uncoupling, is coming out September 22nd. I think we'll answer a lot of questions, particularly from people in pop culture who were wondering what this term meant, and it was sort of ubiquitously showing up everywhere, and there was a big begged question of what is this process, and Katherine is here to not only elucidate and share with us what this process entails, but also just go for it with me about what's happening in real time for her. Hi, Katherine.
Hi, Alanis.
It's a pleasure to be sitting across from you formally, because we've sat across from each other informally on a lot of occasions in different contexts too. I've been to you in the context of coming to you for support before I met my husband, and I was rogue drone dating and flinging it up like a crazy woman. And I wanted a little bit of intentionality and clarity around being empowered at the beginning of a relationship. Your having written the book Calling in the One and my having read it cover to cover was an introduction into the portal that is you.
Thank you.
And then I went to visit you, and there were a few pieces of gorgeously placed advice and wisdom that you shared with me that had me open up to many aspects of my own empowerment, the most important of which was the idea of stepping out of victim consciousness, but only 100% of the time.
Right.
And the invitation of what would that look like if I were to live from a place of not buckling or collapsing into poor me. Not to say that I wouldn't indulge that sweet part of me on my own time, but I wouldn't live from there.
And not to say that sometimes we aren't victimized by the bad behavior of others, the bad choices that other people make. But the decision to be at cause in one's life is the access to power.
Yes, and having that empowerment be combined with and not mutually exclusive to the idea of vulnerability.
Right.
So that vulnerability can be a very powerful choice depending upon the context, depending upon whether the person across from you is appropriate to do that with. But you gave me great guidance during that time, specifically around the invitation of what would life look like if I lived from a place of empowerment and non-victim consciousness. So thank you for that. That was my introduction to you. Mm. And then as our relationship unfolded, I had the pleasure and have the pleasure of calling you my friend. Can I call you my friend? You're like, no, take that back.
It's one of my favorite things is to hear you call me your friend. Thank you. I would sit there, as a counselor, as someone who's, you've come to see me, I have to be very appropriate. I can't really extend myself too much or want to be your friend too much.
Ethics.
I was kind of happy when we were done and complete that cycle. And that when you wanted to be friends, it was such a joy to me. And it is a joy. I mean, you're a joy. You're a joy to me, to listeners who are here with us now. And
bless
we
you.
all just love you so much.
Well, I love the conversation. I love pushing to our personal edges that move us toward wholeness, returning to wholeness, to healing, to recovery, to basically returning to our rightful self seat. And there are so many distractions and so many relief-giving practices and processes and people that can take us away from self. So any conversation between us has had the true North Star of Bethlehem vision of, the overlap of that mission. So bless you for that.
Well, thanks. And I really feel like I have in you a true partner. And I know that we have a lot of partners in people who are with us today too, of people who are really kind of leaning into their own growth because we so want to evolve and we so want to grow beyond victimization consciousness. We so want to be living empowered lives where we can unleash our creativity because that's the seed of that's the beginning of creativity.
Yes, that's an indication of sitting in the seat of self too, that there's this creativity, a general sense of calm, a groundedness, even at times a certainty, courage, all these qualities that self is.
Well, and, I can speak for myself about where that came from. The fascination with how to even construct that kind of a solid, authentic self that so many of us are working towards. And I think that a lot of us didn't have the kind of environments that would have allowed that to happen when we were younger. Yeah. So thank goodness we're creating it now with each other. And the thing about evolution and growth and development is that it happens at any age. I'm a psychotherapist by trade, right? So I studied when I was in school all of these developmental milestones of childhood. And, it kind of stopped, though, the classes in human development when we got to about the age of 21. And throughout my whole training, there was only one class in adult development, which is so crazy. I look back, it's all about adult development now.
Right. And now in modern times, they're saying the stages of development repeat themselves with every new relationship, in adulthood particularly. Then there's Harville, Hendricks, and Helen LaKelly Hunt, who talk about the idea of really having a clear sense of those stages of development and applying them to how we can create correction and healing for each other and turn relationship, romantic especially, or any committed, intimate relationship into an opportunity to help each other out versus, the three-step relationship process of that infatuation process. You can't get your hands off each other, super sexy. Second stage of that relationship being that you're devastated at the thought that you have this fallible human being across from you. And a lot of times it just turns into the relationship of your nightmares. And that's where most people opt out. That's where it seems natural and almost sane to jump ship. Whereas this third stage of development that is calling to us, if we can persevere with two people in a relationship that are up for that kind of a brave journey, is where both people actively participate in each other's healing. And so specifically around your new book coming out, Conscious Uncoupling, I want to focus a little bit around what happens when you get to that stage where the value system or whatever reasons there are for uncoupling, how to turn that into a healing, potentially healing experience versus into the devastating, destructive, blame-filled, shame-filled, regret, guilt-riddled kerfuffle that it often can turn into that can have long-standing effects, A lot of people.
Well, you and I had a great conversation a couple years ago, actually, that found its way into the book about.
Oh, good.
Yeah, about how what you want to be doing before you get to the place of breaking up, and I had
that's its own 5-hour conversation.
It is. And actually, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it because it's almost karmic. Like in some ways, I hesitated to put conscious uncoupling out into the world because there's a very clear 5-step process about how to, do that in a way that's really respectful and honoring, and it takes the shame out of it and it takes the blame out of it. And it doesn't make uncoupling a light thing to do. It's a pretty grave decision.
It's for the brave of heart, for sure.
If you're going to uncouple, conscious uncoupling is the way to do it. But I felt like, oh my gosh, it's going to tip that 50% of, couples, marriages end in divorce scale even further in the wrong direction of people not staying together. So now my big karmic course correction is I'm really into breakup prevention.
Well, you can do the prequels.
I'm doing it.
This is the 5th installment of your series, and you can do 1, 2, 3, and 4. You already have, by the way.
Yeah, well,
you've been doing that all along, and then also just in how you live. I really do see you as someone who who believes in partnership. And I've seen firsthand you persevere through some of the most challenging relationships and staying the course.
Yeah.
So for me, part of what I love, and you as a teacher in that archetype, in that hat that you would wear, is that you really walk your talk. This, often teachers teach genius curriculi, and they themselves, for whatever reason, aren't practicing it themselves. But I've seen you practice this firsthand. It may behoove us to spend a few minutes talking about the steps before a conscious uncoupling, because I do want to support you in sending the message to whomever is listening that conscious uncoupling isn't where you immediately go to after the first moment of conflict. That conflict is often a sign that growth is about to happen. It's imminent. So breaking up the second things start going south is not necessarily the way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, most people are going to, that's the time you want to go get support from someone who's highly trained in like Harville and Helen's work, which is so brilliant, off the charts brilliant.
Yeah.
But you have John Gottman's work, which is brilliant. And you have therapists who are steeped in Sue Johnson's work.
Yep.
These are all therapists who are really on their game. Gay and Katie Hendricks, another favorite relationship experts that I just love and send people to all the time. So, a lot of times we're just missing a lot of healthy skills.
Education.
And we're also duplicating old patterns of the past. And we need a way to take more command over our own impulses and not just act out those stories unconsciously. I mean, a lot of my work with conscious uncoupling and with calling in the one is about being able to take personal responsibility for the patterns that we have in relationship, because it really does occur like life is just happening to us, and it's my fate to be alone, or it's my fate to be in abusive relationships. It's my fate to just always be with people who are more vibrant and sucking all the space up while I'm just kind of invisible.
I'm the co-narcissist.
Right.
Yeah.
The co-narcissist.
Well, my challenge with even, and I share this with a few therapists over the years, was that, my challenge for years was that I would embark upon a journey, and my match, according to my story, was someone who didn't want to do the work.
Ouch. So you were doing twice as much
attempting
work.
to, as the work addict, over-functioning, over-giving, over-loving, over-overing. That was my pattern, was to pick someone who specifically didn't want to do the work. So I think it is an important point to make that conscious uncoupling, what would you say? It's step 5 after having exhausted the first 4 steps, or for lack of a better number?
Well, if you've already broken up, or, you're in the middle of a breakup, it's irreparable, it's happening.
Yeah.
The way that I deal with this is in step 3 is break the pattern, heal your heart. So it's kind of like, stop breaking your own heart over and over again. Look at the pattern, step back, and instead of pointing the finger at the other person, which is so easy to do. I mean, it's almost biologically predisposed.
It's fun to put it all on you.
Yeah, because we're just so hurt, and hurt people. So it just, even the nicest of us will get really mean and nasty and crazy at the end of love, which you wrote the best song on the planet.
Some soundtracks to that are available at 1-900. It also, for me, I'm such a parts girl. I've always been all parts, or all aspects, or subpersonalities, or whatever. There's so many beautiful words to describe the Jungian archetypal parts. So it's also who's in the driver's seat. Because when self is connecting with self, it's inherently conscious. When my raged out part is interacting with a collapsed part of a friend or my partner, it's a nightmare. Right. And those 2 7-year-old parts or aspects of ourselves, they can't consciously do anything because it's not age appropriate for them to be doing that. Self can access consciousness.
Right. You can't have the 7-year-old steering the car, to drive your love life.
No.
You want to put her in the back seat, get her safely buckled in.
You want to snuggle her for sure. Give her some snacks.
Run up, right. Give her a little baba.
Listen, there might be some really wise requests. I often find that the parts, if they're ramped up on 12, level 12, and they're in the driver's seat, if I ask them to step aside, turn the volume down just by engaging with them, they turn into these boons. They help
at every turn, every juncture, even the murderous rage, even all of these things that, according to society, we're not allowed to feel, that we have to get rid of.
Mm-hmm. You know? Well, and I find that many people are pretty, competent in other areas of life, very highly developed, and, can make things happen in the world. And then when you talk about their love life, like it's so
vulnerable and regressive too.
Regressive
we're
and
all
primitive.
11-year-olds.
And
pulling ponytails.
And so, and a lot of people have been, like what I say, sitting on the cushion and the couch trying to sort through these issues. But the truth is that if you can get to the center of the pain of when it's happening and go somatic on it, like, okay, where is it in my body? Like you're going to be an existential detective. Okay, where is that pain? I'm being left yet again. I'm being not chosen yet again. I'm here all by myself yet again. And you go like, where am I holding that in my body? And it's going to be in your heart or in your solar plexus.
Throat.
And then you say, or in your throat, right? And then you say, okay, if the pain could talk, what would it call itself? I am what? I am. And that's the consciousness. I am alone. I am unwanted. Great. How old are you? How old are you? Well, I'm 4. Or I'm just, maybe I'm a baby.
I'm pre-verbal.
Right. I'm pre-verbal. I'm in the crib. I don't even have language for it. It's just this panicked feeling.
That's when it's great to go in the body too, because there's not enough cognition to access what was going on during that time through words or cognitive, but to go into the body can answer things in nonverbal ways, which is a whole other realm of resources for us, right?
Right.
So sorry.
So no, but this is this is the subpersonality that's been driving the relationship and showing up and wreaking havoc. And the thing about that is that when we made these kinds of decisions about us, I'm alone, men always leave.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I never get what I need from anybody.
I will be abandoned.
Right. So when we have that, what we do is we kind of then form our personalities around that structure of consciousness, and we don't develop the skills that would allow us to create anything else. And, so there's this whole thing like, when we're duplicating the past, we're just trying to heal the past. I'm not really an advocate of that. I think we're duplicating the past because we don't know how to do it any differently. We're actually missing development.
Yes. And if we're autonomously doing it, let's say we're single, or in my case, I took a moratorium from commitment for a couple of years here and there just to reset and do the autonomous work. And there are 2 schools of thought. There's the autonomy movement, the self with self movement.
Right.
Then there's the couplehood movement, i.e. healing and correction can only happen in relationship, and I actually believe them both to be really vital.
I do too.
And so the autonomy sort of individual work is with accessing self through inviting, it's very IFS model, Richard Schwartz, like bringing these parts of yourself that are acting out or repeating patterns, having as much dialogical relational connection with them so that they don't have to act out.
Yeah.
That gets you in the front door.
It's like, so when you find out you're 4, living this story of your father abandoned the family, and there it is again, you have to remember you're a competent, resourceful, intelligent adult.
Somewhere in there.
You're not 4. And you have to get the adult in the driver's seat, and then you can comfort the 4-year-old.
And I used to wonder, how do I conjure this adult if I'm having trouble conjuring this adult?
Yes.
So in dialoguing with these parts, this disidentification that Eckhart Tolle talked about so beautifully in Power of Now, this disidentification with these thought forms or these parts allowed me to beg the question over and over again, which is all about, is the non-dualism spiritual approach of who's asking these questions. And if there's a tinge of judgment or shaming or blaming of a part of myself, I can be assured it's not self.
Right.
And so I just keep naming them and asking them to step aside as best as I can until compassion, empathy, presence, neutrality, calmness, centeredness emerges, and then I can have the conversation, because then it's lovely.
Well, and then you have to push back from that part of the self that's like not going to tolerate the lies. No, it's not true. Like God made the mountains, God made the sun, and God made you to be alone and abandoned your whole life. Like that's not actually the truth.
And I would want to know who just said that. My big question, even with those voices that we try to remove.
Do you know what it is? It's the part of you that would say it to me. if I was in I'm in a meltdown, I'm all alone.
Right.
Like it's the good friend in you.
Well, I don't know if that's a good friend.
To say that you're not destined to be alone, Catherine, if you want a relationship, right?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right.
I thought you meant the part of me that would say that God made the mountains and...
No, but I'm saying like the person who can restore you to sanity.
Right.
Right. So that's the good friend in you, or that's the part of us that knows how to parent our children.
Right. Yeah, the loving inner adult that Margaret Paul speaks about so beautifully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's really done a lot to help people connect with that self. So if we can...
And access spirit too.
Yes.
Because sometimes even the role of parent, and I know this firsthand, and you likely know this firsthand too with being an actual parent, is that, calling upon God or spirit or whatever we want to call it, that's a muscle too. That's a portal, a channel to be able to call upon that resource of, I don't know what I'm doing right now. My human ego has no idea what to do. And I really do need to call upon grace, or I need to pray, or whatever it is to get those answers.
Dropping our awareness into that deeper part of the self that always has access to wisdom beyond our years.
Yes. And when these parts of us that are terrorized, traumatized, freaked out are in the driver's seat, for me, personally speaking, I can't access spirit. I can't access that wisdom.
But this is what I think about that. It's like when that happened, when we were, 2, 3, 5, 10, like there was no adult there that was helping us to make meaning. No, sweetheart, your brother isn't mean to you because you're a bad person. Your brother's mean to you because he's jealous.
He likes that purple wand.
He's jealous. Or he's a bully, or he's feeling his oats today, and he's just not developed
he didn't sleep
enough.
last night.
He didn't, right, exactly. Or your mother's not just drunk on the floor because you don't matter. She's drunk on the floor because she's an alcoholic, and your mom needs AA. Like we didn't have any mechanisms to make sophisticated meaning out of what was happening, and no one was there to tell us. So when we get triggered again into those parts of the self, we're just as alone as we were back then.
Yeah.
And that's the practice, is to say, wait a minute, how old am I right now? I'm 4. Okay, where's my grown-up self? Where's my adult self?
And then to complicate things even further, there's my version of the false grown-up self that would often sit in the seat and say, okay, I've got this. But really it was the parentified 7-year-old that was over-functioning as a kid, who was quote unquote poised and quote unquote wiser than her years. And I would pretend to be this adult. So sometimes she swoops in and goes, the adult's here, but the adult actually isn't here still. It's the sweet young part pretending to be an adult. But anyway, I love the tangent of us going on in this parts thing. I could talk with you about this forever.
Well, so in step 3 of conscious uncoupling, what I help people do is to not just name that, which I call it your source fracture wound, the original break in your heart.
Disconnect.
So don't just be preoccupied with this particular breakup and get obsessive about he said, then I said, then she said, then that happened, and which is what we do, is to actually step back and to look and see if you can discover like how this is an extension of an ongoing pattern. Go back to the original source fracture wound and start to see how inside of that consciousness you were actually the source of your own experience. Now, this is really challenging because we're not talking about shame.
Keep going.
Not shaming
ourselves.
It's
responsibility, actually.
It's personal responsibility. So usually when we're trying to self-reflect on ourselves as source, the question we ask is like, what the F is wrong with me? Right? Like, what is wrong with me?
Right. But that inquiry isn't from source. It's from the critic or from the tyrannical shamer or whatever part of ourselves that,
right,
is ultimately trying to protect us, right?
Ultimately, but never going to lead to any kind of development.
Right. No.
So we can't graduate from the pattern inside of that conversation.
No. Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, deeper questions like, what's the part of me that doesn't actually want to be in a relationship with this person? Or, how was I showing up in a way that was pushing him or her away? Right. And what was motivating me to do that? Let's get honest here with ourselves.
And so some people might say, well, I'd love to get honest, but my partner doesn't want to get honest. And for me, it would be finding some resource somewhere. It could be a therapist. It could be a friend. It could be sometimes it could be your book. It could be, there are so many ways to have, I call it like a sane reflection, an accurate mirroring of what's actually going on. Because sometimes when we are in our old stories, there's just no way to see outside of that. And that is where interdependent interdependence does come into play. And it steps out of the autonomous movement of self being responsible with selves. And it gets into a whole other realm of really being able to learn how to lean on appropriate people. One of my challenges in my lifetime has been that I had the muscle to lean, but I was leaning my ladder up against a lot of shattered homes.
Wow.
And I was going to a lot of places thinking that I was being so brave to rely and be interdependent, but really it was my love addiction at play and my leaning on people who specifically would, were set up to disappoint.
So that's a way of being you would identify as what's been perpetuating the story of aloneness over and over.
Yes.
Right. So it's like, and getting really clear about it so that in the future you can say, oh, I know what's happening here. I can see this.
pattern.
I can make a different choice now. Until we make it conscious how it's been happening through us instead of to us, we actually don't have the choice. We're going to forever be sitting there talking about our codependence issues, our low self-esteem issues, our co-narcissist issues. So I like to break it down to that like moment of choice. And the other thing I like to do is to take these stories and to really challenge them and come up with truth statements. Like what's really true about this idea that I'm never going to be loved in the way that I need to. I mean, look, the best truth you can say is, well, I don't actually know.
Right. Or for me, which is probably another version of that, is both. If I have a very declarative message going on in my head that says all cars have to be black, I'll entertain that. And then I'll also entertain, and all cars have to be red, and all cars have to be yellow, and all cars are invisible. Like I just have to entertain all of them. And then there's this neutrality that I arrive at where there's a clarity of thinking. There's more agency. There's more ability on my part to make a choice. So to make it really simple is I just take one declarative statement, like I'll always be alone. And then I'll go to the other end. I'll never be alone. And I'll dwell in that one. Or every relationship ends up in a nightmare. I have to entertain the flip side, which is every relationship gets deeper and more intimate and more healing and more exciting and more fun. And I play with them both. It's beautiful. There's no way for me to get rid of either, to be perfectly frank.
But you can look for evidence of the story you want to be true. A lot of us have this story like, I'm kind of abandoned by life. Like life doesn't support me to have great relationships. And, life doesn't love me somehow.
Or where is God?
So it's like, where is God in my life? So it's like, well, wait a minute, let's look for evidence of the way that life is loving you just even today.
And that muscle that you just called upon is the muscle of in hell looking for the little diamond or the little crack of sun. So that muscle sometimes is accessible through bravery and perseverance. For those of us who are depressed, tough to access the muscle of looking for the light when things feel dire or tar-drenched or whatever it is.
Well, can I go back? Because I loved what you said before about it's a process of autonomy, and then it's also a process of relatedness.
Yes.
And beliefs are relational. Right? So if you break depression down, for instance, depression is like just such hopelessness. I'm powerless. Other people have power. I don't. I'm helpless. Other people can do whatever they want, and I can never get.
And it's the it's the disconnect credo. I'm disconnected from all of life.
I'm disconnected, exactly.
And it's the alchemy of the perfect thing of often hormones, biochemical, food, gut related, inflammation.
Oh yeah, let's
stories.
Not forget all of that part.
Yes,
exactly.
But specifically, I'm going to shut up. You keep going.
Well. So the thing is, though, there's an internal belief system, and there's the challenging of that, inside yourself to really like get to the truth of who am I really, but then it needs to show up in the relational field in order to truly graduate from it, because beliefs are relational, right? We didn't just pluck beliefs out of the ethers. They were formed in relationship with people who we loved and depended upon.
And I love what you said earlier. We're tiny meaning-making machines without the maturity enough to be able to check whether they're accurate. And we didn't have the guidance. There's a lot of movements on parenting, and they're all really colorful and they're all really exciting in their own way. I get scared when there's a playground of really, really young kids and the parents, and this is in some ways how I grew up, the parents' mindsets are, let the kids figure it out. I'm like, they're too little, actually.
Yeah.
And, the helicopter parenting of hovering and meshing, I'm not talking about that end of the continuum or that extreme. I just mean being present as an adult with the child, to letting them frame something or wrap their sweet little brains around something in a way that is life affirming for them.
Well, and as a parent, I mean, we're both parents, right? So we're doing this with our kids. And I think some of my proudest parenting moments are when I kind of watched and caught that my daughter was making a story about herself and about what was possible in her life, and I intercepted the story.
Beautiful. Oh, I get the chills.
Yeah.
That's great.
Like at one point she was struggling. We were diagnosing a little bit of a learning disability for her. And I was watching her make it mean that she was stupid.
Yes.
And what she was doing is withdrawing from the other kids because she was trying to hide it. Now, she didn't come out and tell me that, but I could just, if we're paying attention.
Yeah.
So I sat her down one day and I said, sweetheart, number one, you just have a different style of learning and you're not stupid. And number two is people love you just because you're you. Like you don't have to catch everything that's going on.
Yeah, and there's multiple intelligences, and some of us cultivate and nurture 3 of them, some all of them, some one of them. It's just this erroneous societal message that intelligence means intellectual prowess. There's so many intelligences, but there's this onus and this focus on this one form of intelligence.
So to be able to explain that to her, she actually was like outgoing the next day. She had a personality change after I had that conversation. So, I mean, as parents, we're doing our own work and then we're also watching out. But we could do that with our friends. We do that with each other. We do that with our partners.
Right. And that's where the relationality comes into play. So there's a certain amount of work from where I'm sitting. There's a certain amount of work for me to do autonomously. And there's a certain amount of work for me to do in relationship. And the challenge for me was to make sure that I was embarking upon the work journey with someone who was really up for it and shared that value. And in my case with my husband and my dearest friends, we have similar overlapping values around wanting to take responsibility, valuing a semblance of peace, and operating from authentic self or from self, whatever term we want to use, from essential self, being expressed, being serviceful. In my case, monogamy is a very big deal because I know that for me, the container of monogamy creates this hotbed of safety in which and upon which to do some very intense heavy lifting.
And engagement is what I see that you and your husband are doing too, that you're actually engaged with each other and
ideally.
But when you're not, you talk
we're
about
super
it.
checked out. But I know what you're saying.
We have structures for engagement too, right?
Yes.
So you value that.
Yeah, and we're I hope it's okay to speak for him right now. I'll find out later. But I'm terrified of intimacy, because in this intimate context, in this vulnerable 2 hearts blending for a moment or 20, it's in those moments where I was most hurt. So it's like walking into a death den and then sitting there in that intensity and realizing, okay, we just had 2 minutes of some of the deepest intimacy I've ever had in my life. We're both still breathing. Maybe I'm a little sweaty, but I survived the intensity. And that was a really big piece of advice that I got a few years back from a therapist I was working with, where she said she noticed that my tolerance for intensity would only show up in my art.
Oh, wow.
But if there was intensity, I associated it with something terrible is going to happen. I'm going to be taken advantage of. My own personal story of exploitation or predators so for me to uncouple the intensity of intimacy from terrible things was a big deal.
I think what you're saying is brilliant. I love that you're so transparent too. Thank you. And I've been thinking, remember I was talking about breakup prevention. I've been thinking about breakup prevention. So I've been actually studying secure attachment because a lot of us who have breakups, and, a lot of breakups, we have a history of breakups, which was certainly my life and for many, many years. It's because we have what's called anxious or avoidant, ambivalent attachments. And that's where all the codependence comes in, where you feel like relationship could just disappear on a dime and you have to work really hard and you throw yourself under the bus and you betray yourself and you abandon yourself just to try and be close to people. All those kinds of toxic patterns that create toxicity in relationships, which is, the thing that we run then screaming from the room. So I've been looking at, what are the habits of the securely attached people?
Nice, beautiful.
What are people?
Can you share a few?
Yeah, I will. Well, you just reminded me of it because the first one has to do with, we actually believe that, the first one is that we believe ourselves deeply worthy of being loved. And then
that can be a challenge for some.
Which is a challenge. and it's interesting because, we're working so hard, a lot of us, on, identifying our beliefs about ourselves. So a lot of us know, I have a belief I'm not good enough, or
I'm just not worthy of being loved.
I'm not worthy of being loved.
Yeah.
We haven't quite gotten collectively to that point where we're looking at what's in the relational field, right? Because this is a relational belief. Like, other people find me worthy of loving. Other people like me. Other people enjoy me. So there's like an anticipation that in the relational field you're going to be received and supported.
Can I add a little PS to that part? So much of this has to also do with, what am I presenting to the world? Am I presenting an image that is what I think people love? Or am I presenting myself? So it actually has benefited me to ask people when they say, I adore you, Alanis. Oh. I want to be a little more explicit because of my history.
Right.
What do you adore? If they say, I love how you pay for everything, I'll say, okay, well, that's interesting. Or I love how generous you are with getting me a car. Okay, that's interesting. I love how you listen. Oh, now we're talking. That's an essential quality that I have. Yeah. I love how curious you are. Okay, now we're talking. So that mirroring, which is a big stage of development, around the identity stage. Margaret Mahler, Harville Hendricks, in Keeping the Love You Find, created this stage of development. I think it was influenced by Margaret Mahler and a few people. I'm obsessed with the Erik Erikson, Piaget, Margaret Mahler, Harville's. I mean, there's so many stages of development that I've been squishing them all together. And then in my own time at 1 a.m, once everyone's asleep, I am trying to develop a stage of development that speaks to what versions of addictions that we go to scratch the itch of an unmet developmental task. So with the child, just go through them so that this makes some sense. Attachment stage, touch, eye contact, held, skin on skin, breathing, you exist. Second stage of exploration, secure attachment. I can explore in the world, look back to mom or dad or caregiver and keep exploring. It's safe to explore. They're happy to see me go. They're happy to see me come back. They're there. The third stage of identity, being mirrored. So being told, wow, you look so strong when you jump up on that trampoline, like a lot of accurate mirroring versus the narcissistic concave mirroring of, you're not cold, The child all of a sudden isn't cold or isn't hungry because it puts the parent out. And God bless us. God bless us all. We're going to once in a while not be perfect around that. And the fourth stage of competence. You can do it. And I'll help you do it. I won't do it for you all the time, but sometimes I'll model it for you. You can do it. So in relationship, what's been exciting about bringing the idea of this developmentalism conversation into relationship is that you can keep your eye on the prize of what your partner's Achilles heels are and vice versa in theory.
That's
so
beautiful.
With me, touch is a big one, not surprisingly with the Imago theory of complementary wounding and similar willingness to do the work and similar level of intelligence with an Imago match, high chemistry. Sometimes we think high chemistry is just the sexy stuff, but it's really that there's a match on some mutual wounding going on too. So when the more knowledge we have around where our blind spots are, where our wounds are, we can get to know our partners, and then it becomes an adventure of how to help each other while we're pouring salt in each other's wounds, because that's just kind of set up to, we're bumping into each other, we're stepping on each other's toes. Ideally, we're not re-traumatizing each other, but sometimes that even happens for a spell, but that we can look to each other for this correction.
Well, and there's a fundamental agreement in the relationship to do so.
Right.
And that's what makes it trustworthy.
Right. It makes it safe.
Yeah.
And then there were times where I would be with people at the beginning of the relationship, and because I was addressing the value system compatibility while we were infatuated, they were telling me, of course I value what you value, Alanis. This all sounds really great, and I got gifts with engravings on it saying how much they valued what I valued. But then when we would get into the second stage of power struggle and conflict and nightmare, all of a sudden that value system kind of flew out the window.
Well, people don't accurately self-report, do they?
In one way they don't, and in another way they do.
And that's right. If you're willing to pay attention to the red flags, that's true.
Yeah,
they are telling you. But I do find that we, in putting our best foot forward, sometimes we, get a little
It's that fine line in the dating world too.
Yeah.
This is a whole other five-hour conversation about how to date with consciousness, and the steps that precede the conscious uncoupling. God bless that.
Yes.
Of how to date.
Or come after conscious uncoupling, when you do a healthy conscious uncoupling, you really complete and you're expanded and enhanced and you've learned so much from the experience.
And so could we talk a little bit about the idea of when you're in, random case scenario. I'm sure you've been interacting with a few people who want to know everything about the details of what conscious uncoupling, A, is, and B, how to apply it. So the first question that was born from me was, there are so many stages of grief, whether it's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, anger, denial, bargaining, sadness, acceptance. There's so much intensity and sadness and often devastation. And then you bring in children potentially with custody battles and money issues and who gets the house. And everything is so fraught during that time.
Yeah.
So if you were sitting across from two people who were in the trenches in this specific regard, would there be one big thing that you would come at them with or offer to them or invite them to look at out of the gate?
Well, the first thing, one thing. I don't
want to reduce your genius multi-level.
No, thank you. I think the first thing that I would try and do is get them to do the conscious uncoupling process before they began litigating or getting the family court system involved, because so many people are so emotionally incomplete,
reactive,
that they're hoping that the judge is a holy man and a priest,
right?
And
often they're just a guy who has horses down the street.
Well, the family courts are an interesting thing. They were originally created a few decades ago when the divorce revolution was happening in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, to try and take some of the heats off the regular courts and to make it an expedited process. But what happened is you took out some of the safety nets, like having a jury. So there's no jury in the family court system, which means that, it's kind of a fiefdom.
You're in a bit of a vacuum too.
Yeah. And you're kind of at the mercy of, let's pray you get a good judge who actually cares about fairness, because, we all know that people are not perfect, and some people are not.
Or has lucidity enough to recognize personality disorders.
Exactly.
And so a lot of these judges aren't academics. They don't have their PhDs. Not that that's what is required to have awareness around this necessarily, but I don't know if they're equipped enough sometimes to get into the intricacies of the disorders and the darkness of some of the interactions.
No, they don't. They're actually, the family courts in other countries, they actually will take hours to interview people to really get a real sense of who someone is. I think it's like in America, it's about 20 minutes.
If that.
15 to 20 minutes. So it's pretty, the family court system has a lot of need for reform, let's say it the nice way. And actually a gentleman named Joseph Sorge wrote a book called The Divorce Corp, and it's horrifying what the stories he's telling about what's happening in family courts. So the first thing I'm going to say is, please,
if you can avoid it,
if you can avoid family court, there's and
the amount of money and the amount of emotional fallout. I've had direct experience with the family court process, and it's devastating.
It is.
It's absolutely devastating.
It can suck tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of the family's money down
emotional,
the drain.
The emotional depletion and devastation and the division, I just think of the divisiveness as being one of the core fragments and the core pain of our society, is that we believe in divisiveness. It's the spiritual, it's the lie about spirit, that we're disconnected, and that we live in a society that really seems to still value win-lose and better than, less than, and disconnection and divisiveness and getting the medal. And so we have a system that we're living in societally that sets it up to be divisive and competitive and the
divorce. And if you historically look back at divorce, no fault divorce only was introduced in America in 1969 by Reagan. A lot of people say that that's because he himself was accused of mental abuse to his first wife when she got a divorce. So, and he will actually say, or he did actually say, that was the biggest mistake of his career. weird because, of course, it unleashed this, it unleashed the revolution of divorce in America. But no-fault divorce, believe it or not, the last state to come on board with that was New York in 2010. In 2010. We are like newborns when it comes to, maybe it's nobody's fault. So before that, the courts always demanded that somebody was the bad person. So our whole foundation is this nasty, antagonistic, hostile process. Now, there's a lot of people like myself who grew up during that time and had parents who got nasty divorces. And we were the children they were studying when they came up with those, statistics on how badly children do. I mean, I was like smoking cigarettes by the time I was 10. By the time I was 14, I was already, into drugs and alcohol, and I was promiscuous, and I was out late at night.
To relieve the excruciating pain
of the alienation. I lost my father. I got parental alienation in the hostility and rage.
And at that age, once again, not age appropriately able to corral and manage that much flooding of overwhelming emotion. So I get why people go to what they think will give them relief. The long-term outcome of it is not always awesome. That would be the only reason. It's like, where can relief and resources come into the conversation that don't hurt the body or hurt the humans? So that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
We have a lot of side conversations that we're tabling
that's essentially conscious uncoupling is all about that. Like, how can we do the least amount of damage? Because then I grew up and I was a poster child for, someone who was an adult of a terrible divorce because I had terrible relational patterns. I didn't have secure attachment. I didn't think I was worthy of people staying for me. I didn't turn towards connection when there was a rupture in the field. I turned towards defensiveness and self-protection and all those things that create insecure attachment. So, for me, conscious uncoupling is really introducing a whole new paradigm of how we might do this better, so that it's a process of respect and honor, and where there's even a lot of generosity and goodwill in the process, and where we're really leaning in and striving to do the least amount of damage to ourselves, to each other, and to our children if we have them. And they're kind of actually even characterized. I go even one step further because I'm, I love love, and I love generating love and the evolution of our capacity to love and be loved. And I say, well, let's even learn how to actually be generous and start to make some kind-hearted, generous gestures at the end of love to show our appreciation for what was given and for the good parts of the relationship, so that we're not just fixated on the bad parts of love that happen at the end of love very often when we've devolved into, the fight or flight, nasty attacking behavior because we're kind of slaves to our biology.
Yeah. So how would you speak to the anger aspect? Because a lot of what you're mentioning right now are our consciousness, are conscious aspects of self, generosity, wanting both parties to win, creating the least amount of damage as is possible. These are all very, so this, quote unquote, beautiful qualities. Yeah. What if people are not so much in that place and they're raging out?
Well, so this goes back to what would you say to the couple? What's the one thing you would say to the couple? Okay, now we're ready for the couple.
Yes.
Ken MacLeod is a Buddhist teacher, and he has this beautiful concept where he describes karma, and he actually talks about how Westerners, talk about karma as pretty much like I do something and then it's cause and consequence, or I do something nice. I give the homeless person $1, and then I get an extra $100 in the mail that I wasn't expecting. So there's some kind of cause and effect of karma. But what he actually breaks it down, and he says, how the Tibetans meant about karma is action, seed, result. If you actually break down the original word, it means action, seed, and result. And the Tibetans actually use language in that way. They'll put together, the word far and near in order to come up with the word distance. So karma is one of those words, and it's kind of like what
it's been co-opted by the American psyche.
Yes, of course it has. Right?
We peed all over it. Pardon the disrespect. So
if you plant a seed, you will get a particular result.
Yes.
So if in your rage you plant seeds of animosity, you may be eating bitter fruits for many, years to come. So I actually, like, you and your children are going to be eating the fruits of your actions. Like every action you take, every choice you make, every decision you decide upon, all of this is you're going to be living with the consequences of these actions and decisions for many, many years to come.
Anger acted out.
Yes, in a toxic way. And destructively, yes. So what I teach people to do in step 1, actually, of conscious uncoupling is how to harness the energy inherent in rage. Because energy, it's the energy of change.
It's a fiery one. It's one of my favorites.
Fiery change, man. It is like, oh yeah, you can talk about anger.
No, I live for rage. I don't
anger.
live for rage being acted out destructively, but I live for the fire.
The constructive part of rage. It's like, okay, what's the resolve that you can root down? Like, I will never, ever, ever tolerate settling for less than I deserve ever again.
Yes. So it catalyzes the movement toward boundary setting, qualitatively saying, I'm no longer going to be making these choices. Even if every part of my body wants to choose that kind of animal to date, I'm not going to do it. You know, you can make declarative statements on behalf of self using that fire. I mean, anger for me is the most glorious energy that moves worlds. It creates activism. It's what fuels some of the most inspiring activists whom I know in my life.
Yeah, that's true.
And without that energy, I think also anger can pull people out of depression. It's one of the first steps for me of pulling me out of depression, because in a lot of ways, depression is sublimation of anger.
Right.
You know, I've never been more depressed than when I'm overly contained. And so it's often a balancing act of, to what degree do I leak out some of this anger in appropriate ways and maybe even helpful ways? And to what degree do I table it and address it later through inner dialogue or in therapy or punching a pillow or getting a bat with a pillow,
right?
Or even in the imagination. You know, a lot of people ask me, how do I move this rage? Because it's become debilitating and it's paralyzing me. There's so many ways. Kickboxing has been one of my favorites.
Wow.
Writing songs, writing unsent letters, genius. Reading unsent letters to safe people whom the letters are not directed toward.
Right.
Even dancing, Gabrielle Roth, 5 Rhythms, when I'm in that chaos stage of her 5 Rhythms, it's just so much of the rage is just flying out of my pores. Art is beautiful for that, but art is cathartic. It's not necessarily healing. And for me, what I would wish for anyone, and certainly wish it for myself as well, is that the rage could be expressed in a way where it's cathartic and it's moving, but the act of expressing it creates a healing in relationship. So that it wouldn't be just relegated to the art therapy. And part of why I love art therapy is because there's another human being in the room, and often more than one human being. So it is relational. Yeah. But bringing anger to a relationship is the very heart of conflict and resolution.
Boundaries.
Right.
I know I have always allowed this to happen, but it won't happen ever again.
Yeah, this isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
And then to actually mean it. How many times have I said, this isn't working?
But not
and then I tolerate it again.
Yeah. Right. But when you harness all that energy of anger, that's when you can really, have a good shot at that.
Yes. And when I'm speaking from that angry part, however old she is, every age I have a rager. But when I'm speaking from that part, that there won't be a great effect to that one. But when I'm communicating anger in a relationship from the seat of self, from that mature, in this case, 41-year-old woman, very powerful, because it's not destructive.
Right.
So it depends on who's speaking about the anger. Am I reporting about the anger to someone, or is the anger overtaking me, eclipsing my entire self, and I'm raging from that 7-year-old place? And that's where the destructiveness comes from.
So how do we inspire people to do that? Well, you have to look at what's at stake. And that's the next thing I'd say to the couple. Like, and what's at stake? What's at stake? What's at stake, really? If you have children, like, what's at stake for your children? Because if you're running that energy, even if you manage to have a quote-unquote amicable separation, where you're not overtly mean to each other and you're managing,
you're behaviorally sound.
You're behaviorally appropriate and sound.
That can be dangerous too, by the way, if you're trying to do it too perfectly.
Yeah, well, if you're festering, it's like children pick up everything.
Yeah, and your ex-partner will pick up
exactly every little thing.
And sometimes that Cold War energy can be the most destructive too. The icy silence can be sometimes, for me anyway, just as destructive as someone raging out.
Yep, it can be really bad. So it's to look at, what's really at stake in our children's psyches, and even what's at stake in our own psyches in terms of, I was just researching today on the physicality of anger and what happens. And I think we're 19% more likely to have heart disease if we're walking around with festering anger and rage.
Yeah, repressed anger creates terrible ill health issues. Yeah, I mean, the idea too of just brainstorming where that anger can be moved, because it is a force. And so it has so much wisdom in it. You know, anger is so often vilified because it gets a bad rep because it's often acted out destructively. So when someone says, oh, they have anger issues, does that mean that they throw things? Does that mean they have no calibration over it and they harm people? Yeah, that's not awesome. But the fire of anger in and of itself is a potent force. I think the only one equal to it is love, in my mind.
Wow, I think that's beautiful. So it takes something to be able to harness it.
Yes, and then also just being judicious about where to express it too. Maybe your ex-partner is not the person to process it with.
Well, and I would agree with that. I actually talk a lot about, you know, even for people who are doing it together, because sometimes people want to do the process together. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's best to do a lot of it on your own, autonomously. And after you've done all your work, then you can come and share certain things, certain parts of it that are really going to create repair. Because I'm all for repair. You know, a lot of things that we don't, one of the things that we don't do generally with the way that we part ways is we don't really value repair. Like we talk a lot about repair in a relationship. We don't talk about repair when you're leaving a relationship. And
do you mean the licking of the wounds part?
I mean, but in the relational field. Like let's say we're going to move from being married to now we're going to co-parent our 2 children. I'm in a fantasy about Katherine and Alanis having 2 children.
They're so cute, by the way.
They're so adorable. So we're gonna uncouple now.
Some
we're
parallel universe. We'll conjure those 2 ladies. Okay.
So we're gonna uncouple. We're gonna co-parent our 2 children.
Okay.
But there's still festering.
Still kind of want
resentments in the field.
Take it out on each other.
Tensions. You know, there's just things that are incomplete. There's hurts that are incomplete. So in conscious uncoupling, I actually teach people how to repair that. So you're not going to necessarily reconciliate as a couple, but you're going to clear the field so that you can really go on to create what I call your expanded family. You know, where you kind of recreate the agreements to be more appropriate, to be almost like brother-sister or sister-sister or, you know, cousins, you know, because I'm not really a big fan of even, you know, where parents learn to be polite, but the children have to go from one family to the other. The children now have 2 families that are very distinct from each other. Yep. And I think that's unfair to children. I think that's putting children in the middle and asking them to have to always be at a loss because they're losing one family to now go join another family. Then they're losing that family to go rejoin the other family.
It's grief after grief.
And so I think that it's up to the parents to grow as much as they can so that you can become an expanded family. So you are still one family system. And just like you would with your cousins or with your brothers or with your aunt and uncles, you don't have rigid schedules that have to be adhered to and you go back to court. Like really,
well,
ideally,
that's when there's personality disorders. I mean, that rigidity, is almost mandatory with personality disorders. I think when we're dealing with people who are willing to do the kind of work that you're inviting people to do, I think it is actually possible. And it does call upon the bigness in all of us to be able to be graceful.
And with people who have grown enough to be able to unpartner with their personality disorder former partner, it's going to really require that they become a very big person. And where self-responsibility comes in is like, okay, I'm going to be responsible for the karma of creating children with this person where I ignored all those red flags because I wanted what I wanted and I was refusing to see it then. And there are there's karmic consequences to the choices that we make. Absolutely. And we have to be responsible for them, especially when children are involved. Yeah. So they're fast tracking enlightenment, those folks.
Yeah.
And it can be
you
done.
have to be really creative and think on your feet moment to moment with all the new emerging junctures of these choice points of how do I manage this part gracefully? Yeah. Financial, logistics, shared custody, being in the legal field, the pain, the loss, the grief, the rage, the unspoken things, the wow, you lied to me, you know, before you got married, you said you'd be up for doing the work. And if anything, you know, if any of us had addiction problems, you would address them and you're not, you know.
Well, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, we have to value lessons and growth. Really value them. Like, wow, that was a really expensive lesson, but thank God I am who I am today. You know, we have to actually value that. And that's some way to find to actually be at peace and to value the time that you spent with your partner, whether that was because there was beauty that was happening or because you had an opportunity to you know, grow and to heal those wounds from the past. Or
not. I mean, there's some divorces and some breakups on my part where we came together, we poured a ton of salt in each other's wounds, and then we broke up. Like,
well, and that's where you. But
that was awesome.
But then you want to do the conscious uncoupling process.
But on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that you never. So that's the growth.
Yes.
Then is after the breakup.
Yeah. You're the panacea.
Yeah. You're the last time that was ever going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Like,
bless that.
The end of that story.
And so that really brings into the conversation the idea of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so I was invited to participate in a forgiveness project with Desmond Tutu. And I thought it was hilarious that they were coming to me to speak on forgiveness because I wasn't really that great at it.
Wow.
And I remember Byron Katie once saying that forgiveness is misunderstanding what happened. And she says, if you walk up and you think, if there's a snake on the ground and you walk up to the snake and you see it's a rope, you'll never be scared of that snake again. And so she was using that as a metaphor to describe what forgiveness is that there's a misperception of what was going on. And that beautiful invitation of when you're standing, quote unquote, you know, when you're standing across from your enemy, if you saw their childhood, they would no longer be your enemy. You know, if you saw what they endured and what they've been through. So this idea of mercy or this idea of magnanimity or forgiveness, can you tell me in terms of your conversation around conscious uncoupling, what would be a nugget or two that you would share around the idea of forgiveness?
Well, it's interesting. I love what you're saying about forgiveness. I don't know that I agree because it leaves fully. I mean, I agree partially, but I think there's always people who have had even worse childhoods and still choose to be good people and do right by other people. So there is an element of choice in who we're all going to be.
I don't know if I agree with you on that one.
Okay.
But this is part of what I love about the conversation aspect is that it'll show teachers learning and vulnerable, like modeling what we're talking about, which is,
okay. So we're talking about forgiveness.
Yes.
And we have a little discrepancy in our perspectives.
We might. We'll find out in a second.
Okay. So
we might not.
Okay. So you describe forgiveness. So you said something about forgiveness being if you could just see someone when they were children and then you would kind of understand, or if you see clearly.
Yes. And I think the distinction that needs to be made is that the behavior of the acting out, forgiveness does not mean tolerating it.
No,
or agreeing with it.
We're aligned there.
It means, for me, forgiveness and understanding are bedfellows. So if I understand, this dog was beaten with a stick over and over and over again as a puppy, and this dog just bit me. The idea of forgiveness is almost I love the idea of forgiveness almost being a non-issue, because if I understand 1 + 2 = 3, am I forgiving or am I just getting what happened?
But you know what that assumes? That assumes that all selfish action comes out of suffering, some sort of suffering.
But I do believe that.
See, I'm not sure I believe that.
Oh, this is good.
I think
Grist for the mill.
I think that selfish action comes out of the egoic, disregard for other people.
But where does that come from? Because I believe that if we reduce it right back to the first step is, who are we innately? And when I watch my son and I watch the kids that he plays with, let's get really granular and specific around an actual example. Specifically around the idea of sharing. So if I walked into your closet and I grabbed your diamond earrings and I put them on and then said, bye, would you be very happy about that?
No.
Okay. So as kids, we say to kids, share your new little magical wand you got with Billy. What? So there's a disallowance of some sort of proprietary connection with a thing.
Right. So you're talking about
hormone
wounds
brains
when we're young. And I think what you're going to say is that we're inherently
generous.
Generous.
We're inherently generous. I do believe that. I do believe that there is an inherent, when one is in self, there is an inherent love. And the bill of goods that we were sold is that, through religion and otherwise, is that we're inherently sinners and bad, and we need to beg for forgiveness from Jesus.
Right.
And so for me, I just think I don't resonate with that at all.
What if there's a third option, though?
Great, I want to hear it.
Which is that in a universe where we're constantly evolving and God is not yet done with creation, maybe we're just immature and we haven't yet developed that muscle, and that there's a moment that we have where we see that we shouldn't do something, but we choose to do it anyway because we want that shiny quarter for ourselves.
But that right there, what you're describing, is a developmental stage. So if that task wasn't complete, we will repeat it in our 50s. But the actual repetition of the behavior was born from the wound of the developmental task not being met, of proprietary allowance, omnipotence, which is a stage of development. All these stages of development that allows a child to be, quote unquote, selfish, self-absorbed, in control. I'm in charge of this game and I'm going to tell everyone where to stand. That's a stage of development.
I don't know. What I like about what you're saying is that it's it's an inherently generous perspective on human beings, because it's sponsoring the goodness in all of us.
Now, that doesn't mean behavior isn't abominable and that boundaries aren't needed.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't know if it's necessarily true.
Which part?
I don't know if every selfish action that we take comes from a wound. I think it might come from an unwillingness to be expanded, or a thoughtlessness, or an indulgence.
But if we take so you think that it could be a maturity conversation?
Yeah, or about one's will, right? So we also have choices. This whole thing about people are doing the best they can. I'm not sure.
I don't believe that.
Okay, I'm not sure.
I don't believe people
true.
are always doing the best they can.
No, I don't do the best I can all the time.
I'm not doing it right now.
Right.
I'm at 81%. Okay, but I do think that, and now this is just ideal best case scenario. If during every stage of development, as a village, and this also speaks to where's the village, if a village corrals around the developing child, there are stages that allow them to be, this is mine and I'm not sharing it. And that rupture of a child cognitively dissonantly being told that they have to share when the stage requires them to have a proprietary, this is my pen moment, sets off a whole lifetime of them having a skewed relationship with what is mine, what is fair, what is sharing. Am I supposed to share? Am I really evil and I don't want to share?
Right.
It's that conversation.
But now you're talking about the development of conscience in a child too.
But isn't conscience having to do with whether we're aware of the idea of win-win? The feminine imperative of win-win?
There's a wonderful book called The Sociopath Next Door, and I wish I could remember the author's name, so please forgive me.
Yeah, my neighbor wrote it.
She did?
I'm joking.
I'm sorry, I missed the joke for a second there. Her name. Okay.
Imagine.
Oh, no. It's really funny.
So the book's great.
And her theory is that conscience is an evolutionary emergence. And
let me say that slower, because my brain sometimes takes things slowly. That conscience is an
emergence. It's like an evolutionary emergence. It's a capacity that's an emergent capacity in human beings.
Does that imply that a 2-year-old doesn't have access to it?
No, but it implies that some 2-year-olds don't, and that some 20-year-olds don't, and some 50-year-olds don't. Like some people are actually sociopathic. They don't have conscience.
Well, that's a whole
right
other conversation. So I'm not actually talking about sociopaths and major personality disorders and profound mental illness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the day-to-day, relatively traumatized average human being that that the acting out in a way that flies in the face of the idea of win-win, that flies in the face of unity, was born from a rupture of some kind. Are we going to have to agree to disagree on this one?
No, we're going to agree now because now you said you're not talking about sociopaths and people with personalities.
Okay, so you were talking about them.
But I have so many people in my life.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about that.
Who knew better? Who knew better and didn't do the right thing anyway? And
but I'm not sure. But then that would take them out of the category of sociopath then, because sociopathic behavior implies that they don't have access to that.
No. Sociopathic behavior means that they don't have conscience, so they do know right from wrong and choose to ignore it because they don't have any empathy for the person that they're perpetrating something against.
But lack of empathy implies a wound.
No, that's what she says. It's an actual birth phenomenon. The people who are sociopaths are. This is her theory, which made sense to me at the time. Yeah. I have to go back and read the book now. But that,
me too.
She says it's not actually from child. That there are some children who are born and they torture animals. They just come in with no conscience. And she's saying that
that's a genetic predisposition.
That it's a genetic predisposition.
So that part I get.
Okay.
I don't mean I get it as in
it's hard to really
I'm
wrap
embarking
your brain
on that
around
one.
it.
Although
sure.
it sounds like it could be very sound. I'm more talking about the idea is outside of the realm of sociopathy and all of the.
Then I'm with you.
Okay, great.
Now
we don't have to agree, but I'm glad we are.
Actually,
it regulates my nervous system when we agree.
Okay, good. Me too. I'm much more calm down now.
I'm sweating a tiny bit less, but only a tiny bit less.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So, but what brings it full circle too is that even if you've been burned by a sociopath or somebody who
been there,
should have done the right thing, didn't do the right thing, knew they should have done, could have, would have, but didn't.
Yeah. For various reasons. Then it always comes back to forgiving yourself, learning the lesson, forgiving yourself, and making the adjustment and the amends is to yourself. Okay, I will always trust my own inner knowing moving forward, or I will always... Or I will attempt to begin to.
I will do my best to just, discern
steps.
My own feelings and needs before the feelings and needs of others, or whatever that...
Or how about at the same time? For me, it's win-win or no deal, even in our family. If everyone's winning and mommy's losing, that's okay for an afternoon here and there. But as a constant mode of operation for the gang,
right? Something needs to change.
And that with enough brainstorming and enough goodwill, you will always find the everyone wins on this one.
Well, I love that you're saying that too. So that's also true. We don't want to forgive when there's something off that's happening that needs to actually be corrected.
Addressed, yes.
Addressed and corrected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the wrong use of forgiveness, is I'm just going to forgive them.
That's a version of dissociation and splitting off, which, has its purposes. But the idea of... I just watch the little creatures and their bliss and regulation around when everyone in the room is winning. And that it is up to the parents to brainstorm that one and invite them into the brainstorm for that. Mm-hmm. And I do agree that there are certain... Now, I am so ignorant about the sociopathic genetic predisposition in the DNA thing. I'll have to read more about it. I also see that when little tiny kids are abused and bullied, it's going to be a rough go for them to see and picture and imagine a world of love and benevolence and unity and connection.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then you see, then maybe even you begin to see it as your opportunity to kind of spread the love, give them a corrective experience, learn the lesson yourself.
And the interesting rock and a hard place on that one is that the idea of supporting someone who doesn't have the idea modeled for them of support being functional or being an option, their tendency is to reject it, So that's sometimes when I just have to let go and say there's actually no way to appeal. Yeah. There's no way in. And at this point, it would be me popping out of my own self in a dysfunctional way to try and fix or help or control something that's actually none of my business. And a lot of times just sending love from afar is the way to go in that particular case.
For sure.
So now I want to read that book.
And I forgive you for not reading it.
Watch for Catherine's new book, Conscious Uncoupling, available September 22nd of this year. Thank you so much for listening today, and I invite you to subscribe if you're up for it. Next month, we're going to be speaking with Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt, authors of Keeping the Love You Find, Getting the Love You Want, and Making Marriage Simple. And I'm honored to call them colleagues and friends, and they've always been mentors to me. So we have a lively conversation about relationship, and I look forward to connecting with you all soon. Have a great month.